Hi everybody, I'm Cynthia Hunt. I am the programs specialist here at the Amarillo Public Library, and today I'm going to give you a tutorial on how to make bird bookmarks. That's right, these are bookmarks. So they will keep your place in your book and also look cool while they do it. So let's get started. Okay, now in order to get started, you're going to need some materials. Some yarn that is worsted weight. I went with a regular Red Heart Super Saver, but it doesn't have to be that, but it needs to be a number 4 or medium weight worsted yarn. You'll also need, for the beak, if you want to do a contrasting color of beak, a contrasting color of yarn. And this is optional, but it is recommended simply because it makes it look more separated from the rest of the bird. So you'll want to get about a yard of some other color of yarn. You'll also need a yarn needle in order to sew up your ends and sew up your bird. Some polyfill or some other kind of stuffing that you want to use. It doesn't have to be polyfill brand, it could be some kind of little stuffing that you have. I wouldn't use fiberglass, but go on ahead and use what you want. You're also going to need some size 8 knitting needles. It can, or whatever size goes best with you. If you're a real tight knitter, you may want to go up a size. If you're a real loose knitter, you may want to go down to a 7. But a US size 8 or 5mm knitting needle. I'm going with a double pointed needle this time, not for any specific reason. There's no technique that requires the use of a double pointed needle on this project. But they're nice and short, and the entire project will fit on this. And I don't like to have a whole lot of extra knitting needle on a project because I start feeling like I'm rowing a boat, and also the ends can start hitting the arms of a chair. If I'm sitting in there and knitting, it will start snagging on stuff, and I don't like that. So I'm going with something shorter. And you don't have to go with double pointed. It can be like a 10-inch, regular 10-inch needle in a size 8. You'll also need about 2 feet, 24 inches of a flat ribbon or braid, or you can make a braid out of yarn, but I do it really loosely so it will still squish really easily inside the book, because this is what's going to go inside the pages, between the pages, and you don't want it to mess up your book binding, and you don't want it to make the book unstable while your bird is perched atop it. So get something flattish. Also about 2 feet. What you'll be learning today is going to be a very quick mention of the slip knot cast on. I'll do a long tail cast on. You'll need to know the knitting stitch, the knit stitch, which becomes the garter stitch when you knit in both directions. We'll also be doing an increase and a couple of different kinds of decreases where you increase the number of stitches on your needle or decrease the number of stitches on your needle. So that's what we're going to be learning today. Well, we're also going to be doing some short rows to create the turn in the head, and that's going to be something that we haven't done before because we'll be doing a wrap and turn on the inside edge of that short row. We're also going to be doing some stuffing and sewing like we've done in times past with the knitted bunnies. And, which we haven't done before, if you are going to use a contrasting color yarn, I'm going to show you how to do a color change. So get ready, get set, let's go. Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is how to do a slip stitch, or slip knot. Okay, so to do a slip knot, what you're going to need to do is go up about, in this case, about 10 inches up from the end of the yarn. And you are going to make a loop with the cut end of the yarn on your left, the skein end on your right. You're going to make a loop and bring the skein end over the cut end, then bring it up under. Then you can pinch that piece and tighten, and you've got a slip stitch. It's called this because if you pull on it, it slips out completely. So, and you can also adjust your size of the loop because of that. So you have your slip knot. Once again, you make a loop, go under, pinch, bring it up, and then you're going to put your needle inside the loop, and there is your first stitch on your needle. Okay, once you've got your slip knot made and your loop has been secured to your needle, you're going to put your thumb and forefinger of your left hand together and put it between the two and wrap your ring and little finger around the yarn. Then you're going to spread your index finger and thumb apart and pull with your right hand the needle away from them so that they form these little crosses. And what you're going to do is insert the needle up through the yarn on the thumb, then stroke down through the yarn on the index finger, and then down through the loop that goes around the thumb. Then you're going to let go with the thumb and tighten it, and now you have a second stitch on there. Let's do that again. Put the index finger and the thumb in, bring them forward, go up the thumb, stroke down through the index finger, then down through the thumb, let go of the yarn with your thumb, and then pull it tight with your thumb by spreading them again. Now you have 3 stitches. We need 5, so we're going to do this 2 more times. Up, down, through, tighten. Up, down, through, tighten. I love doing long tail cast-ons. They're so fun. And that's all you need, 5 stitches, and that's what we've got. Okay, next you are going to knit across this row of 5 stitches, and every time you complete a row you're going to turn your work and mark that you have completed a row, because you're going to be doing this for a number of rows. So the way you do a knit stitch is, first you get your second needle in your right hand. The knitting that you're going to be working on, the ones that you just cast on, are now in your left hand. You get your other needle in your right hand, and you're going to insert it tip first towards the tip of the other one, so they're both in the same direction. You do not want to go this way, because then you'll wind up doing a purl stitch, and that's not what we're doing here. You'll find out why later. So anyway, you bring this one in, you cross them, you get the skein yarn and go behind that back needle that was in your right hand and bring it down between the 2 needles, then stroking down really with the tip of the right needle, you'll catch that piece of yarn that you just wrapped and you'll pull that first stitch off, and that is a knit stitch. So let's do that again. Insert it, wrap around, grab it with the right needle and pull it through the loop on the left, and move the stitch that was on the left off of that needle, and now you've got 2 stitches on your right needle. We'll do this again. Insert, wrap, catch and pull through, and remove from the left needle. You've got 3 stitches now. In, around, through, and off. 4 stitches. In, around, through, and off. And now you've got your first row of knitting, and you're going to do this, turn it by putting the long skein end towards the tip of the needle in your left hand. That's called turning your work. And then you're going to do it again. And we're just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And mark that you've done another row, because you're going to do 18 of these. And they go pretty quickly, but you want to make sure that you keep track of them. So I'm going to speed up a little here. So now we've got the bird's tail, 18 stitches. Here is where you're going to learn how to make a knit front and back. What this is going to do is allow you to turn 1 stitch on your needle into 2 stitches. Now, because we are wanting this portion of the bird to be symmetrical, we're going to do an increase on the beginning of a row and an increase at the end of the row so that it will go out equally on both sides. And in between each of those increase rows, we'll do just a straight row of knitting. So it'll be an increase, knit to the end, another increase, turn, knit back, and then we'll start doing it again. Okay, so now you've got your 18 rows of tail, and we're going to start broadening out the body to create the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what is called an increase, and the increase that we're going to be doing today is called a KFB, or knit front and back, and it's usually indicated with the letters KFB in a knitting pattern. And what we're going to do is do the usual knit stitch, except instead of taking it off of the left hook, we're going to go back around and over and dip into the back half of this stitch. And we're going to bring it around again and pull it through and then let that stitch off. So where you had 1 stitch, you now have 2. Now I'm going to knit 3 stitches to get to that last stitch on the other side, because we want this little bird body to be symmetrical. So what we're going to do now is, again, start off like you would a regular knit stitch, go around, and then after you bring it through, instead of taking this stitch off the left needle, you're going to swing your right needle over and poke it through the back part of that loop. Then you're going to bring it around and catch it with your right needle and bring it through, and then bring that off. So where before we had 5 stitches, we now have 2, 4, 6, 7 stitches. And because we don't want this bird to balloon up too quickly, we're just going to knit the next row. 7 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to knit front and back the first stitch again. You're going to repeat those 2 rows. Knit front, swing around, go through that back loop, knit the back part of the loop, then knit all the way to the last stitch on this row. 5, 6, 7, and now we're at the last stitch, and we're going to knit front, then swing around, knit back. That's why it's called a knit front and back, because you do the front part and then you do the back part, and it widens you out. So now with those two, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 stitches. Then you'll knit another row. And what we're gonna do is just keep on doing this. These 2 rows where you knit a front and a back at the first and last stitch on one row, then knit your way back on the next row. And you're gonna do this until you get up to 23 stitches. So here we go. Now, you will see on these little stitches that they all have a little band of yarn right at the base of the stitch. Whenever you do a knit front and back, you may be wondering, well, I got interrupted. How am I going to remember if I just did a knit front and back row or if I just did a knit row? Well, if you're doing a knit front and back, the back one is going to be literally behind the front one. It won't have this little collar or loop of yarn. You won't see it. So you can see the one over on this one. Let me get another needle so you can see this better. See how you have a little collar of yarn here and a little collar of yarn here? This one is actually farther in. So you'll know that that was a knit front and back. It wasn't a regular knit row. So you can go on ahead and go to the end, because you can get interrupted in the middle of a row. You can get interrupted between rows and you say, where was I? And you can tell a little bit just by the stitch count, but if you're needing to know, okay, but was I on a row where I was increasing or was I on a row where I was just knitting and making the slope more gradual? That's how you do it. So again, knit front, swing around, knit back, bring it up and bring it off. And when you turn it, you will see again that that knit front and back, this knit is what looks like it was in the front, and the next one looks like it was in the back. You don't see that little collar of yarn around it. And that's how you can tell whether you did a knit front and back row or just a straight knit row. Now I'm just going to do a regular knit row. And we're going to keep up at this until we get all the way up to 23 stitches on our needle. And we'll go on ahead and knit another row just because we're repeating both rows. And then I'll tell you what we do next. Yay! Stay tuned for this dramatic announcement. Okay, so now we're at 23 stitches on our needle, and we've done all of the increase. Now we're going to continue the body, because most birds' bodies aren't real round. They're usually a little elongated. So what we're going to do now is knit 8 rows to kind of maintain, elongate the body of the bird, and then we'll begin the decrease section. So we're going to do garter stitch, which is knitting front and back all the way across, front and back, and I'll see you in 8 rows. Okay, so we've gotten our 8 rows, and now we're ready to begin our decrease section of the bird. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a gradual decrease. First we're going to, since we have an odd number of stitches on here, we're going to knit 2 together, and this is K numeral 2, then TOG. Sometimes there's a space between the 2 and the TOG, but this is called knit 2 together, and it's exactly what you would think it is. You're going to, instead of just knitting through 1 stitch, you're going to put the needle through 2 stitches. You're going to bring it through, and now you're at 22 stitches. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches. Then we're going to do, in the very middle of the row, a knit front to back. So we're increasing. You're like, well, why are we increasing when we just decreased? Because we're going to be decreasing on both sides, and I don't want to go too quickly and make too sharp an angle on my decrease. So I knitted a front to back, and now I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And what am I left with? 2 stitches. So I'm going to decrease by doing another knit 2 together at this edge. So what I did was have a knit 2 together here to decrease it, add a stitch in the very middle, and then decrease it. So I've gone from 23 to 22 stitches. And then what I'm going to do is knit for 4 more rows. So that's from 23 to 22. We'll knit 4 more rows, and then we'll continue the decrease section. Yeah, it can be a little confusing on that line where it's like, well, why am I increasing when I just decreased? And it's called the decrease section because you want a very gradual decrease. Instead of doing it by 2 stitches on that row, we just did it by 1. And then we're going to do half again the length of the body that we just did with the regular straight knitting 8 rows. We're going to knit 4 rows. Okay, so now we've got that additional 4 rows of 22 stitches done. We're going to sharpen the decrease again, and this time it's going to be kind of, we're narrowing the shoulders of the bird. So what we're going to do is knit 2 together, knit to the last 2 stitches on this row, and then do another knit 2 together. So that's, and we'll keep doing this all the way down until we get to 14 stitches. And this is why we needed to go from 23 to 22, because we need an even number of stitches on what we're going to be doing farther on in this project. And I would say every time you finish knitting a row, go ahead and count your stitches to make sure you know you are doing the right thing, that you're still, because you don't want to go too far. Whoops, see, I just went too far on that one. So I'm going to undo that stitch and do a knit two together so that it stays symmetrical. Symmetrical is good. It's very aerodynamic and birds need aerodynamic design. Okay, so you turn your work and then you just knit across the row. This isn't that easy, that hard. I mean, it just goes, okay, I've done this many rows. You just have to keep track of your rows and keep doing it. So this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So we have completed our first decrease row since those 4 rows of knitting. And then we're going to decrease again. So we're just going to alternate between knitting 2 together at each end of the row and then doing a row of knitting. Okay, so that finishes our decrease section. So we've had our tail, our increase, our maintaining the body or elongating the body, then the decrease section. Now we're going to start on the head. And the head is going to be done largely in short rows. If you've never heard of short rows, this will be an adventure, but it's fun and it's not hard at all to do. So the first short row we're going to do, we're going to knit in 9 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, in a normal short row, we'd go on ahead and turn the work and just head right back. But because normal short rows leave a little bit of a gap, and we don't want a gap in the back of our bird's head, I mean, why would we? We're going to go on ahead and bring the yarn forward between the needles and slip purlwise the stitch, the next stitch. Then we're going to bring the yarn back to the back and bring this stitch back over to the left needle. Then we're going to turn it and bring it back to the back. And see how this wraps around this stitch? That's going to keep us from having that little lacy looking hole, because otherwise we're going to have birds that look like they got shot in the head with bird shot, and we don't want that. So then we turn and we knit back those same 9 stitches. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So then you turn your work again, and you can already see that this is beginning to create more length, more space, a little wedge on this side of the fabric of the bird. And that's what's going to make our bird's head turn. Now, the next one we're going to do is just going to be 7 stitches. So, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And again, we're going to do the wrap and turn. We'll do this on each set of short rows. Bring the yarn forward, slip the stitch purlwise over to your right needle, bring that yarn back. See, it's already starting to wrap around that one. Then bring that stitch back over, turn your work, bring your yarn to the back, and knit those 7 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and that's called a wrap and turn. And usually in patterns it will be a capital W and ampersand and then a capital T. So we've done a 9 stitch short row, a 7 stitch short row, and see how much more slanty the needle is now because of those extra rows that we're putting in. We're going to keep on going and do 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we're going to start the beak. Now, what we're going to do, we now have 14 stitches on here. So, to decrease it down so that we can do the beak, we're going to do a row of knit 2 together. So we'll go from 14 stitches down to 7 stitches. And then you have a decision to make. You can either have the bird's head going to the left, or you can have it going to the right. So if you want it going to the left, you're going to knit 1 row, actually may make it go to the right, as you knit 1 row. Nope, this will be to the left, because the first row that you do of the bird beak will be the change color, and that will be, you want it to be turning the right way. If you want it to turn to the right instead of to the left, you'll knit another row so that it's facing this way. And you'll see why in a minute. But now, if you're going to get a contrasting color of yarn for your beak, now is the time to get it out because we're going to change colors. Okay, now it's time to make a decision. If you want to have your beak of your bird be in a contrasting color, it's time to get out the contrasting color of yarn, and we're going to do a color change. If you don't want to use a contrasting color of yarn for the beak, but I really recommend it because it looks a lot more like a bird, you don't have to. All you have to do is skip this part, and whenever I start telling you what stitches to do, just do them, and you'll wind up with a 1-color bird, which some birds are all 1 color, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of personal preference. Okay, so now we're going to work on the beak, and the first thing to do with that is to get the color change ready. And on the color change, you get your about 36 inches just to have lots extra to reshape your beak if you don't like the way it turns out. And what you're going to do, at least what I did, is give yourself about 7-8 inches of extra. And what I do is go on ahead and I'm going to bring it over with that first thing, because what we're going to do is another decrease called a slip knit pass over. So I'm going to put this on there like a little band, and I'm going to go through both of them, kind of like a knit two together, but we're going to knit them, slip that one, then we're going to act like we're going to knit a stitch, but instead of using the yellow yarn, we're going to use the brown yarn. Knit, and then pass both of those over the stitch you just knitted. And that gives you a nice little knitted stitch. Then you're going to go exclusively to the contrasting yarn. We're going to knit 3, 2, 3, and then we're going to knit 2 together. That should take us to 5 stitches down from 7 stitches. So it's becoming narrower, but see how nice and pretty that looks on top. This bird's going to be facing that way. If you look at it from the underside, it's got all of these little interminglings of the yellow and the brown. And so you don't really want that, which is why I was saying you need to either do another row if you want the bird's head pointing the other way. So we're going to turn our work, and next we're going to do another slip, knit a stitch, then pass the slipped stitch over the knitted stitch. And this is usually done showing it as SKPO, or slip knit passover. So that's a slip knit passover. Then we're going to knit 3, and that narrows the beak down to 4 stitches. Then we're going to turn it again, because we have to turn a lot once you get down to this few stitches. We're going to slip, knit, pass the slip knit over, the slip stitch over, sorry, and then we're going to knit 2 stitches. I like a bird with a beak on it. I don't want too small a beak, so I made this a little bit bigger than you see on some bird patterns. We're going to turn it again and knit 2 together. Knit 1 stitch. Doesn't this go fast? Then turn your work and knit 2 together. Yay, you've done all the knitting for a bird bookmark. Now what you're going to do is bring out this last loop on your needle, and you're going to, where's some scissors? Oh, there they are. And we are going to cut the skein. Actually, don't even need to, because there's not enough there. So that's fine, it's just fine. So what you're gonna do is take this active end, and we're going to pass it through that last stitch and then tighten it. And now you have your bird beak. Now it's time to assemble the bird. And what you're going to do, you've made this wonderful fabric out of your bird, and you can go on ahead and start shaping it. So you're going to need to get your yarn needle, and we're going to start off using the ends of the contrasting color of the beak to sew that and shape it as much as we want to before we go on to the other color of the body and sew it together. Now again, if you don't have a contrasting color of beak, just do what I'm doing and you don't have to worry about which color you're using. But if you are using a contrasting color, you'll need to keep them separate from one another while you are shaping your bird. Okay, now, again, take a look at how your bird shape is looking, and you'll see how, if it's on the wrong side, they refer to these as right and wrong. They're not really wrong, they just look different on knitting and crochet. This is the wrong side, but you can tell because you can see where the yellow and the brown kind of loop through each other, because when you look at the other side, you don't see that. So you want to make sure that you have the right side facing up on your bird. You don't want to have the wrong side facing up. And you're going to get the yarn needle and put the end that's towards the tip of the beak on the needle, and you're going to use that end to shape your beak a little bit. So if you think, oh, there's a big gap over here, then what you can do is just use this to shape it a little bit. You're not really doing anything bad or wrong, you're just making some cosmetic improvements. It's getting a nose job is what it's happening, okay? So you go on ahead and you bring through the yarn to make a better shape. And if you feel like there's too big a hole or something in the middle, you can just work your yarn through it and cover it up. So you have a nice, pretty little shape there. And then once you've shaped it as much as you want to, you're going to go back to the base of your beak. You don't want to be up at the tip. You want to be off at the end so that it will make a nice, pretty beak. And I'm going to go on ahead and go out a little bit more on this side. There. Now, I'm going to run it back through because I want it to be on the underside. Because what we're going to be doing next is we are going to be sewing this little sucker closed. So I've got that shaped the way I want it. Now I'm going to get the other side and bring it through to the underside of the bird, because that's the part that's going to be stuffed. This is going to be the outer side of the bird. So now I'm going to bring this under, and now it's a nice little beak. And what I'm going to do now is take that needle off, and I'm going to take all three of these ends and tie them together in an overhand knot as close to the body as we can. And that's going to go inside the bird, and there's a lot of slack, so I'm going to go on ahead and cut it off a little over halfway. So now we have a nice little bird beak and the beginnings of a bird head. Now, what we'll do next is we're going to get a nice long piece of the yellow yarn, in this case, or whatever color you want it to do, and it doesn't have to be a huge amount. I'd say maybe 3-4 feet, and we're going to cut that and put it on the yarn needle. And because it's new and we want to attach it, I'm going to go on ahead and make a square knot. If you don't know what a square knot is, you have two pieces of yarn, you cross one over the other. Let's see. And then you do the opposite. So if it was over on the right the first time, it's over on the left the second time. And that way it's attached to these other loose ends. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing the edges of the bird. He's got kind of a bent beak, but that's okay. I kind of like that. Kind of gives him a raptor look. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to bring this over from the underside and then bring it over about a yarn's width in on the opposite side. So now it's under the body of the bird. And what I'm going to do at that point, I'm going to put the yarn on the wrong side of the needle on the wrong side of the yarn because I'm working down this way. What you can see is that these ridges are going to need to match up down here, but they can't do that up here because there's so much more fabric where we were doing those short rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to even that out and go down about 3 yarn widths and come back up on the short row side. And then I'm going to go back across and down about 1 yarn width into that fabric. So I'll be using up 3 times as much fabric on this side. Every time I do this, we'll go back up 1 yarn width on this side. Then I will go over immediately opposite, about 1 yarn width down from where the last stitch came up. Then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, about 3 yarn widths farther down that fabric and bring it up through the head. And when you tighten it, you can see that this is going to start turning the bird's head. And I'm going to go back across. You can see where I am. And go back down. And then back up just 1 piece of yarn because this is the shorter side. There's going to be a shorter side and a longer side. The longer side is where we had all of those short rows. So I'm going to bring that back over. And then we're going to go 3 lengths of yarn. 1, 2, 3. And eventually that evens it out. As long as you keep going back over, you wind up having less and less of that excess fabric. It's not really excess, it's just what you need whenever you're going to turn the bird's head. Then I'm bringing it back up, 1 yarn width across. Then I'm going to go back over one yarn width down from where the last one came over from to this side. And then I'm going to go down 3. See how much farther that is? You can see there's a little bit of fabric still left, but nowhere near as much as there was. So we're going to go down 1 from where the last one was on this side. And what you're doing is every time you do this, you are sewing these two sides together, but you are leaving so little space that the stuffing won't come out. And you are helping create the turn, because you know how when you turn your head, the back of your neck, you can feel the muscles move. You're doing exactly the same thing with this yarn. You're letting this be stretched out and the other won't be. So go back under several spaces. Oops. Not what you want to hear, but my yarn came off my needle. But that's an easy fix. That's one of the things I love about these yarn needles. If you've never worked with a yarn needle before, you can tell that they're yarn needles because they have these ginormous eyes that you don't need a needle threader for. And they can be really sharp, they can be kind of sharp, or they can be really blunt on the pointy end. Now, you can see how little there is now. I'm going to do probably about one more of these. I go down and up through one piece of yarn. Now I'm going to go over, then through about 3 pieces of yarn on the underside. And this creates what is called an invisible seam. You can't really tell where it was. Even if I were using a contrasting yarn, and I could, but I don't have to, but it would make it really hard to see. See how little extra fabric there is now? They're almost lined up. So I'm going to do like one more. Get over the beak. And then across and down 3. And then down and up 1. The good thing about this invisible seam is that it not only catches these inside pieces and pulls them together, but it makes it almost invisible. Even if I were using a contrasting thread, you wouldn't be able to see it. So now I'm going to line these up, and see, they're just about perfectly aligned now. And what I'm going to do is keep going over to the opposite side and go down into what's the inside of the body, and then sew on down. But first, since I've gotten this part evened up, I'm going to get a little bit of stuffing and shape the head. And this underside is going to be the bird's underbelly, and this is going to be the bird's back. You can tell he's got a kind of a hooked nose, but it's kind of charming. I'm a sucker for strange noses, what can I say? Okay, it's a beak, get technical. Okay, so now I've got this made, and so I'm going to come up and I'm going to make sure these ridges, you can see where the ridges are, you line those up, and then what I'm going to do is go over and under a ridge on one side, and then go back between the ridges and come up under the ridge on the opposite side. And this is going to hide your stitches really nicely. Then you're going to go back over and then go under a ridge and come out between the ridges, and then come back over and go under the next ridge. And you can see where the ridges are. So it makes it easy to do. And as you tighten it each time, you go down between the ridges, up between the to the next ridge towards the tail. Always make sure you keep heading in the same direction. And down. directly opposite. See how this is working? Come out. You go to the ridge opposite, and then go under it in the direction of the tail. And that way, everything looks like it's all lined up, and it's hard to see where the seam is. And if you don't really care about that, you don't have to. But if you're a perfectionist, which I'll admit, as far from perfect as I am, I tend to be a perfectionist. I tend to try and do that stuff. Okay, and when you get down to about an inch from the tail, we're going to stuff the rest of the bird. So we're almost there. And then the only thing that will be left is to add the ribbon. So, see, it doesn't take very long. You don't have to be real tight with it. You just have to be snug. I think I missed on that one. I did. I'm gonna have to go back through. I got so busy talking, I forgot to watch where I was sewing. Watch where you're sewing. Okay. Okay. So we're almost there. Now we've got about an inch. So we're gonna get some more of the polyfill and stuff that little bird. And this is much easier than stuffing a turkey or a chicken, because you can do it with your fingers. You don't have to wash your hands afterwards. You also don't have to rinse it out on the inside and salt and pepper the cavity and all that good stuff. Okay. You don't have to put in a lot of stuffing. You don't want to make it really too stuffed, because birds are pretty narrow and aerodynamic, and you want to keep them that way. So I think I may need to put a little bit more stuffing in at the top of the head of the bird. There we go. There we go. Just work it a little bit and it'll get where you want it to be. I can see that brown yarn in that thing, so I'm going to move it inside the stuffing so you don't see it. And now you're going to have this bird that is turned to the left. And what I'm going to do now that I've stuffed him, I'm going to gingerly go up and down through the bird to sew his little body to the ends to each other to keep the stuffing from getting out. And if you're not real confident about what you're doing, you can go on ahead and go through and look at where you're going in at the top, because you don't want it to be too obvious that there's like these ginormous stitches. But if you keep going in and out through between the ridges, it'll look pretty good. And then bring this back over to the underside of the bird. And if you want to play with its formation a little bit to make it a little bit more symmetrical, you can. And then what you're going to do is you are going to give yourself about 10 10, 12 inches and separate them. So there's usually 4 strands, it's a 4-ply yarn, and you're going to separate them out so that there's 2 groups of 2. Ooh, that curls up. Then you're going to put 1 set of 2 on the needle. And you're going to take it 1 piece of yarn farther away than where it came out. Let me see. I want to do it this way, so that they're separated by a piece of yarn. And then you're going to make another square knot real close to the base of the tail, as close to the body of the bird as you can. And then you're going to put both of those batches of plies of yarn back onto the single yarn needle, and you're going to poke this through the body of the bird without doing it so tightly that you change the shape of the stuffing. And you give it just a little bit of tension. I want to make sure I have just the 2 strands. There we go. So then you give just a little bit of tension and snip, and it falls back into the body of the bird. And that hides that end. So you've now hidden both of the beak ends, the end of the yarn that was up here, the ends of the yarn that you sewed it up with, and now you've got to bind off this tail end and weave it in. And usually I'll just go on through one side or the other of the bird tail, just along the edge. And then pull it out. There we go. And then do the same thing that you did before. Give a little bit of tension and snip. And you have now made the bird. All that remains is the ribbon that will go into the book. Okay. So now what you're going to do is add the ribbon. And the first thing you're going to do is thread the ribbon or braid through your yarn needle. And it doesn't have to be even because you're going to be bringing it through the other side and then taking the needle off. So it doesn't have to be perfectly even. What you're going to do is set your bird on a flat surface or on a book and figure out about where you would like the ribbon to go into your bird, because you don't want it falling over to one side or the other, and you don't want it falling on its face. So where balance-wise would you want it to be? And I'm thinking right about halfway down this way. Then I'll get it on the seam and bring it out and in, and then pull that needle off, and then I'm going to pull those together so that the ends are the same length and make an overhand knot. And an overhand knot is where you just get both of those ends together, and instead of making a square knot so that the ends go in opposite directions, you're going to make just a plain old knot and bring both of those ends up and as close to the body of the bird as you can. And there you have your bird. And when you hold it by its knot, it should kind of be perky, because you'll be able to put this into your book and then pull, and that will help it stay upright. It'll be nice and tight. And now you have your bird bookmark. So there you have it, your very own bird in the book bookmark. And you can make these for gifts. You can make them for all of the different books that you're reading. Keep a whole flock of them on your cookbook shelf to mark favorite recipes, whatever you want to do. I would say that if you have questions about any of the steps in this, except for the increases and decreases, I would go on ahead and look at some of our other videos that I've done on our YouTube channel. The knitted bunnies will have a lot more about stuffing your bunny or your critter, in this case, since it's not a bunny. And it also goes a little bit more in depth on doing the slip knot, the cast on, which is again a long tail cast on in that, because it's usually my favorite. And it'll also go a little bit longer on how to do a knit stitch. The potato chip scarf will tell you more about how to do cross rows, although it will eliminate the wrap and turn that we did in this particular project. So that's it for today. I hope to be doing more projects in future, so keep tuning in and see what else we have to offer. Take care. Bye-bye.